It is Thursday, December 2nd here at Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the Week 13 preview edition of the podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. And Jared, I don't know about you, but I've got some tough decisions to make and some key money on the line lineups this week. And they start tonight with the Dallas at New Orleans game and a player that I know that lots of people are wondering about this week.
Yeah, no matter how long you've been doing this, the decisions always get a bit, tougher. You think about them a bit longer when we get into this point of the season. I know all the high stakes people are in their playoffs at this point. And if you're in a normal league, you're a few weeks away. So I don't know. I say stick to the same process. The decisions are the decisions. You should be, making the right process play and kind of just let the chips fall where they may.
I don't know if it makes it better to have been doing this long enough that you can make the right decision and still end up with the wrong player just because some guy happens to score a touchdown. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. Not sure yet if it makes it easier or harder. I don't think it really does either. I guess it makes me recover easier when I end up with the wrong guy in my lineup and say, well, I mean, it was the right pick. It didn't work out, rather than kicking myself for picking the guy that didn't score.
I've become pretty hardened in fantasy over the years where I feel pretty good about my decisions on Sunday morning. And then, I don't really get too upset unless I look back and that was actually the wrong decision. And then I'll be upset. But if things just don't go my way, touchdown luck just doesn't go my way. I'm pretty good about not letting that bother me anymore. It used to, back in the day, but not anymore.
So let's stop talking in vagaries and we'll get to the specifics of this game. It is Dallas at New Orleans on Thursday night. Cowboys by 5 points in this game, over under 48. Dak Prescott was coming off a bad game at Kansas City last week on Thanksgiving, struggled early in that one, but really rebounded for a nice game against the Raiders. According to PFF, it was just his second game among 10 this year where he had 0 turnover-worthy throws. So, like I said, ended up with a good game overall. This is a tougher spot. The Saints are good on defense overall, but they are particularly good against the run.
Yes, much better against the run than the pass. They're kind of mid-pack as far as pass defense, DVOA. The Saints are actually 28th in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. And the Cowboys offense is getting healthy now. We know CeeDee Lamb is back for this game. It sounds like Amari Cooper is back for this game. We can get into him and, what kind of fantasy play he is. But, him being back is good news for Dak Prescott, obviously. And the Cowboys O-line is getting healthy, too. It looks like Dallas is going to have Tyron Smith, Lyle Collins, and Zach Martin for this game. Actually be the first time this season they'll have those 3 O-linemen and Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. So I think it's a good spot for Dak. I'd feel good about using him this week.
And it should be the first time that they have CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, and Michael Gallup in the same lineup. And it also on the other side with the Saints defense, they're missing some kind of key players, relatively key players. Slot corner CJ Gardner-Johnson's out. He's on IR. Defensive end Marcus Davenport is out. So not the top level of that Saints defense to go against a Dallas offense that's getting healthier. So, yeah, I feel pretty good about Dak Prescott at this point. It seems like it should be a good spot for him. We've seen good spots go wrong for him before. We've seen the Saints play up when they're home dogs. Maybe that happens, but this is one of those cases where even if he doesn't work out, it's a good spot for Dak Prescott.
It is. You mentioned those defensive injuries. I think it's going to be a big CeeDee Lamb game tonight. He's going to be in the slot primarily. That's what we've seen when Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup have been on the field. It's those 2 guys on the outside. It's CeeDee Lamb in the slot. We know that's a good place to attack the Saints defense, especially with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson out. Cooper is the tough decision here. I mean, this is like one of those COVID things we really don't still have answers to. He was just activated on Tuesday. He was reportedly still not feeling well on Tuesday, only got in a limited practice on Wednesday. That's his only practice since going on the COVID list. So I'm not sure how big a role he's going to be ready for, how big a role Dallas wants to play him in, whether, he's in game shape and is going to be able to handle a full slate of snaps. So, Cooper is definitely a risky fantasy play tonight. I think CeeDee Lamb is the best bet among Dallas wide receivers. And really, I think Michael Gallup and Cooper are kind of in the same tier as kind of wide receiver 3s, but with some risk, with some upside, though, because we like the offense tonight.
Yeah, and that's the tough thing here is a lot of times if you have a receiver of Cooper's caliber and you have those questions about him, you say, well, they're going to give him opportunities because they need to. Dallas doesn't need to. CeeDee Lamb is out there. Michael Gallup is around. Dalton Schultz is around. They do have 2 running backs that they like, so they don't have to get the ball to Amari Cooper. So there's certainly some risk to him. I think he's kind of in the high-level wide receiver 3 mix, and when you get down to that point, I mean, there's so much variance that's going to come in the game. Who just happens to get open on certain plays, who happens to break big plays, who happens to get end zone targets. So Cooper is an option. I'm not sure he's an exciting option.
Yeah, I would also expect Cooper to see a lot of Marshawn Lattimore when he's out there because, again, he has been playing primarily on the outside this season.
Now, Ezekiel Elliott, of course, is probably the biggest decision player here because if you just look at his season-long numbers and the offense he plays in, he looks like a must-play. He looks like the guy that you get to this point in the season and you say, start your studs. But that's not really the way to characterize Ezekiel Elliott's current state. So after the Thanksgiving game, we got the Ed Werder report that the Cowboys were considering giving Zeke some time off, maybe even sitting him out for this game to rest the bone bruise in his right knee. Then he had full practices all week. Zeke said over the weekend that nobody had asked him about taking time off. Jerry Jones said Tuesday, we expect him to have a serious load, which sounds gross, but there's no indication beyond the Ed Werder report that we should actually expect Ezekiel Elliott to play less in this game.
I laugh every time I hear serious loads, though. It's like the 15th time I've heard it, but it's still funny. So a couple things with Zeke. He's, Tony Pollard out-carried him last week, 10-9. Zeke still saw the 8 targets, though, to Pollard's 4. Zeke also still played 64% of Dallas's offensive snaps in that game. He ran her out on 64% of the pass plays. That was also on the short week, only 4 days rest. Now it's a Thursday night game, but Zeke's had a full week of rest because they played, on Thanksgiving. So I don't expect full Zeke. I don't expect, the full serious load Zeke that, Jerry Jones is saying. I think we're going to see more Pollard than usual, but I do still think, 12 to 15 carries and, decent amount of passing game work is kind of what I'm expecting for Zeke tonight. I also think he's still a fine touchdown bet. He's still getting those goal line looks ahead of Tony Pollard. So, I think you downgrade him to like an RB2, but an RB2 with upside and a guy that I think in most cases I'd still be using in fantasy lineups.
He's still in starter range in our running back rankings for the week, but it's more than just the bone bruise here. Over the past 5 weeks, Zeke, and it might be the bone bruise, but it's more than just whether he sees fewer touches than he has lately. Over the past 5 weeks, Zeke is 19th among running backs in PPR points per game. He's only that high because he has 3 rushing scores in that span. He's averaging 3.4 yards per carry in that time. He had 3 games among those 5 with 10 carries or fewer. So they don't even have to change what they've been doing to give Zeke the ball less in this one. And his scoring in PPR has been boosted by a reception surge the past 2 weeks. He's seen 15.6% target share over the past 2 games with no Amari Cooper, with limited CeeDee Lamb over that span. Otherwise, Zeke has seen 9.7% target share for the season. So even if we get 50 Dak Prescott pass attempts tonight, 9.7% is like 5 targets in that kind of high volume game. So we're probably not going to get as much receiving as we've gotten lately. We're probably not going to get what Jerry Jones would classify as a serious load rushing. And we get a bad matchup. The Saints are the toughest run defense by Football Outsiders DVOA, and they are that by a wide margin. It's not close between them and number 2. So it's a bad matchup for a guy who has not been playing particularly well. Maybe Zeke Elliott scores twice tonight. He could have a bad game and still score 2 touchdowns, but he's not really a great play.
So who are you considering benching Zeke for?
It's Jamaal Williams is the biggest decision.
Oh.
And I think that it's even amplified. I think I'm even leaning more toward Jamaal Williams because my other option could be Sony Michel if Daryl Henderson doesn't play. So waiting on Zeke tonight leaves me Jamaal Williams as the fallback and leaves me the opportunity of playing Sony Michel if there's no Daryl Henderson.
I mean, our rankings have Williams pretty clearly ahead of Zeke Elliott. I mean, it doesn't feel great, but I would go Jamaal Williams there.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think I'm going anyway. I think I had myself talked into that anyway, even if Sony Michel doesn't play. We'll, of course, get to the Lions in a minute, too.
Yep.
On the Saints side in this one, I mean, is there much to say about Dalton Schultz, you think, before we switch teams?
Bad matchup and more target competition. So I think it's like a low end tight end one, but I think, he's not a guy you have to bench.
Mm-hmm. I agree. On the Saints side, no Alvin Camaro once again. He was initially ruled questionable, but it's been since reported by both NFL Network and ESPN that he's not going to play in this game. Saints are also down both of their starting offensive tackles. So Mark Ingram is the starting back, but I mean, it could be a low floor, low ceiling spot, made even worse potentially by Taysom Hill started taking over a quarterback.
Yeah, so Ingram in the 2 games he played that Camaro missed, the weeks 10 and 11, Ingram averaged 15 carries per game, 7.5 targets per game across those two. The targets are going to come down with Taysom Hill under center. There's just going to be less passing from the Saints. I do still think 15 carries is a pretty reasonable projection for Ingram tonight. Missing the tackles hurts, as you mentioned. Dallas has been pretty tough against running backs. They're actually 5th in adjusted points allowed to running backs. So I think Ingram's an RB2. I think Ingram and Zeke Elliott are close as to who the best running back play in this game is.
Yes, and I think honestly that one would come down to who lucks into a touchdown. So at that point, it's kind of flipping a coin. We got an interesting question from Brant Wilson on Facebook. Flex PPR spot, either Mark Ingram or Chase Claypool. What do you think, Jared?
Yeah, I almost always go with the running backs when it's close like this. I just like the touch certainty. I do think Claypool has the higher ceiling, but I think Ingram has the much higher floor. So I would go with Mark Ingram there.
I would lean Ingram here too. We'll get to the Steelers, but both Claypool and Ben Roethlisberger start the week with some injury questions. So he's done well on target volume lately, and there's certainly upside to him, a higher ceiling, I agree. But I think I would lean Ingram for the safety and touches.
Yep, agreed.
Anything else really worth hitting on the Saints side? Because I don't think I'm playing anything at wide receiver.
No, not at wide receiver. Taysom Hill is the big question here, and I was higher on him 2 days ago than I am now. No Camaro hurts, both tackles missing hurts. Even last year, if you look at his numbers, Hill had Michael Thomas for all 4 of his starts last season. There's no Michael Thomas this year, so I don't expect a lot in the passing game from Taysom Hill. I do so, and the other thing too is he's coming off the foot injury, and he says he's dealing with a partially torn plantar fascia, which can be a tough injury. He says it's more of a pain management thing, and that it's not impacting his functionality. That's still a concern for his rushing. So I've kind of cooled on Hill throughout the week. I think he's an option if you've been streaming quarterbacks, but I would not go sitting any locked in quarterback one that you've been starting all season for Taysom Hill this week.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would not play Taysom Hill over Derek Carr. I think anybody below that is, worth a consideration. And Kirk Cousins, by the way, is not down in that territory either. Kirk Cousins is well above it.
Yes, agreed.
And Jalen Hurts, I think, is another one. Actually, as we get to the next game, Jalen Hurts will be the starter of that one. I would play Jalen Hurts over Taysom Hill this week.
Yeah, I actually had that decision in a league, and I'm waiting to see what we hear about Hurts today. If I feel confident about Hurts playing, I'd rather use Hurts. Just the timing of this makes it a little tough.
Yeah, so let's jump into that one now. It's Philadelphia at the New York Jets. Eagles by 7, over under 45.5. And I agree with you, Jared. That's the bad thing about Thursday Night Football is it just makes us make stupid decisions. But Jalen Hurts was limited Wednesday, got the sore ankle coming out of that bad performance against the Giants. He says he'll play. That doesn't always mean he will, but I think things are trending in that direction. He should be determined to bounce back from arguably his worst game of the year, whatever that means. I don't know how much determination matters unless you're Baker Mayfield. But overall, Jalen Hurts still has the most top 12 fantasy finishes among quarterbacks this season. So I'm going to probably lean toward what he's done for the year over concerns about his performance last week.
Yeah, last week was just his second game outside the top 12 fantasy quarterbacks of the season. He's 10 out of 12 as far as finishing as a quarterback one. I expect him to play too. He was limited on Wednesday. He says he's going to play. He played through the injury last week. He hurt the ankle early in the fourth quarter and played the rest of the game. The concern is, whether and how much the ankle impacts his rushing ability. The nice thing here is he has more passing upside than usual against the Jets, who are 31st in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA. They're also 31st in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. But even if Hurts' rushing production is down a bit here, I think there's a good chance we get more passing production out of him than we have recently. So yeah, I think he's a top 12 play this week. Again, I do like him over Taysom Hill as long as we know Hurts is going to play.
And I think his other non-top 12 game was the game at Detroit where he played well. It's just that the scores went to other people. It's worth noting, too, the Giants, they're not tough on defense, but they're not a total pushover. It's not like he had his bad day against the Jaguars.
Yes, agreed.
So I'm going back to Jalen Hurts, really like over the other guys I would reasonably be weighing him against. Again, Kirk Cousins would be above Jalen Hurts in the rankings. Derek Carr, kind of a toss-up. I think Hurts probably has the higher ceiling. Actually, I'm not even sure he has a higher ceiling. Hurts and Carr, I think, very even, would be more of a coin flip.
Yeah, I'd go Hurts there, but I'm with you. I would use Kirk Cousins over Hurts this week.
Elsewhere on the Philly offense, no Jordan Howard or Boston Scott at practice on Wednesday. It was just an illness for Boston Scott, so it doesn't seem like it'll be a concern. We'll certainly watch that. Miles Sanders is actually limited after coming away from Sunday's game with some ankle soreness. So the backfield's going to take some sorting this week, but last week we saw Boston Scott the better option than Miles Sanders.
Yeah, Sanders tweaked his ankle. I think it was on his first carry of the second half last week, and I think he only had 2 or 3 carries the rest of the way. In the first half of that game, it was 6 carries for Miles Sanders to 4 for Boston Scott, 2 targets for Scott to 1 target for Miles Sanders. You know, if Sanders' ankle isn't a limiting factor on Sunday, I think that's kind of the split we're looking at. Maybe Sanders with a few more carries than Boston Scott. But assuming Jordan Howard's out and it's just Sanders and Scott, I think both those guys are in play as, you know, borderline RB2s just because this matchup is so good. The Jets dead last in adjusted fantasy points allowed through running backs.
I agree with that. They'd be more attractive if they didn't have a better running back playing quarterback for their team, but certainly an upside spot for whoever is active for this game.
Yeah, and again, if Hurts' ankle limits his rushing, that probably means more carries for the running backs.
Maybe. We'll see about Nick Sirianni's decision-making in this case. No Devontae Smith at practice on Wednesday as well. He also had an illness, so not a good time to be around Eagles headquarters, apparently. We'll assume he's good to go for now, but the situation still makes him a low-floor play.
Yeah, wide receiver 3, gets a boost because of the matchup, but, Philly's just not passing enough to make any of these pass-catching options safe fantasy plays.
Yeah, same deal for Dallas Goedert, who's 11th in our PPR rankings despite a positive matchup. I'd be flipping a coin if I were deciding between Dallas Goedert and Noah Fant, but it would probably be Noah Fant for me as a better bet for target volume.
I'd probably lean Goddard. Goddard had seen 6+ targets in 3 straight healthy games before last week. Last week was kind of the outlier, and the Jets are dead last in Football Outsiders tight end coverage ratings. I think Goddard's matchup's a bit better, and I honestly think the volume projection is kind of similar for these two guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will go with similar. We'll get to Noah Fant in a few minutes. Zach Ertz, Dawson Knox, I think 2 other guys in similar range. I would go with either of those guys over both of those 2 tight ends we were talking about.
Me too.
On the Jets side, Corey Davis still no practice Wednesday, so we'll see if he's able to return this week. Keelan Cole is on the COVID list. Coach has already said he's going to miss this game. So if Corey Davis remains out, maybe Jamison Crowder goes back to existing, but the Jets showed us last week that we shouldn't trust anything by throwing him 1 target in a game where Braxton Berrios got 3 targets.
I mean, how bad is Zack Wilson right now that, it's a noticeable drop-off from Joe Flacco and Mike White to Zack Wilson? It's tough to even trust Elijah Moore right now. He hasn't produced with Zack Wilson. And Moore's usage last week, by the way, was still awesome. 88% of the snaps, 97% of the pass routes. He saw 8 targets. That was a 33% target share. But he caught just 4 balls for 46 yards. So it's tough to trust him, especially in this matchup too. Philly has been tough against wide receivers all season. They're 3rd in adjusted points allowed to wideouts.
Yeah, so don't like any of them, but if you're reaching, Elijah Moore is the top one. Jamison Crowder is a really deep reach, but, one with some target volume upside.
Yep.
Backfield, by the way, was split 3 ways without Michael Carter last week. Tevin Coleman led in carries. Ty Johnson led in pass snaps, but saw just 1 target. Austin Walter, everybody's favorite undrafted free agent from 3 years ago, was the red zone back in this game. He's 5'7", 194 pounds. As I said, a 3rd-year undrafted free agent. So he jumped off the practice squad and took over red zone carries. I don't think there's any way any of us could say we know how the backfield's going to go this week. Let's hope you don't need any of them.
Yeah, I mean, I can say pretty confidently that these guys won't combine for 31 carries again. That was a result of being a close game against Houston. Tevin Coleman got about half of the running back carries, but I think you're going to get 20, maybe 25 carries for all of them this week. So yeah, hopefully you don't have to mess with any of these guys. Tevin Coleman is the play if you have to, though.
Mm-hmm. Ryan Griffin, I think, is really the only other guy worth mentioning. There's some matchup upside here. The Eagles have allowed a lot of fantasy points to tight ends, but he's really more of a cheap DFS option than he is for actual redraft lineups, unless you're in a particularly deep league. If you're considering guys like James O'Shaughnessy this week, I'd take a shot on Ryan Griffin over him, but Foster Moreau, I think, would be an easy start if there's no Darren Waller over both of those guys. Yeah,
easily Moreau over Griffin. I think I'd even go O'Shaughnessy over Griffin. I actually dug into Griffin because the Eagles matchup is so good, but Griffin's just 31st among tight ends in expected fantasy points over the last 4 weeks, so his usage hasn't even been that strong.
Well, yeah, we can't look to any Jets for expected fantasy points.
No, expected, yes. Actual, no.
Anything else in that game?
No.
Arizona at Chicago, the Cardinals by 7.5, over under 45.5. There's no Chase Edmonds still for this game. Cliff Kingsbury says he thinks Edmonds will be ready for week 14. So we're starting James Conner with confidence still. DeAndre Hopkins, however, limited Wednesday. So back to some action. He missed the past 3 games, plus most of the previous one with a hamstring injury. Kyler Murray also limited Wednesday. Looks like he's going to be ready to return after 3 games with an ankle sprain. So it's going to be the first time in a while that we've seen either of those guys. And only the second game that Zach Ertz will have played with a healthy-ish Cardinals lineup.
Yeah, it sure sounds like we should expect Murray and Hopkins to play this week. And it also seems to me that, Arizona has been cautious with them and, held them out to get them back somewhere close to 100%. So I think Kyler and Hopkins should be back in fantasy lineups, assuming they're active on Sunday. And Hopkins' return obviously is going to hurt Christian Kirk's target share, AJ Green's target share. So I think those guys are, fringy wide receiver threes. I do think Kirk is the better bat. He's just been more productive. He's having a good season. Kirk is 25th among wide receivers in PPR points right now. Again, I think he loses some share with Hopkins back. And then Zach Ertz. We talked about his usage being strong. He's out there. He's running pass routes. He's had a pretty nice target share and gets Kyler Murray back now. Ertz finished tight end 5 in that one full game with Kyler Murray. So I think he's a borderline top 12 play this week.
Yeah, he was down in playing time that one, but that was his first game with the team. 49% snap share. He's been over 70% in every game since then. I would expect it to be more like that now. 5 targets in that game, caught 3 for 66 and a touchdown. Had the one long catch and run touchdown, which is not something we count on from Zach Ertz, but decent enough target share, I think, in this game, and in a good offense for scoring opportunities.
Yep, for sure.
On the Bears side, still no practice for Allen Robinson on Wednesday. He missed the past 2 games. No practice for Marquise Goodwin, so we'll see about him just for the sake of how many targets it leaves available for other people, not because we're considering Marquise Goodwin now that we're outside of short slates for DFS. Justin Fields put in a limited practice, so we'll see if he's back for this game.
Yeah, Matt Nagy said that Andy Dalton got the first team reps on Wednesday, so it kind of seems like they're still prepping him to start this game. Maybe we get Fields back for week 14, but I don't think you're messing with either quarterback at this point. It's Darnell Mooney, who is kind of locked in as a fantasy starter at this point, assuming Allen Robinson remains out. 24 targets for Darnell Mooney over the last 2 games with Andy Dalton. Cole Kmet is the other guy in play here, I think. He missed Wednesday's practice with a groin injury, so that's going to be worth monitoring. But Kmet has 6+ targets in 4 of his last 5 games now. He's 10th among tight ends in expected fantasy points over the last 4 games. So he's getting nice usage. The upside's still kind of limited in this offense. The matchup is also tough against Arizona. They're second in Football Outsiders tight end coverage ranking. So, Kmet, not an exciting play. I think all those other guys we've talked about, I would play over him this week. And that includes Foster Moreau. I would, snag him and play him over Cole Kmet. But, Kmet is a decent target bet for the position.
Also, Arizona's the 5th toughest matchup for fantasy scoring by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. And, you mentioned the upside. Jimmy Graham has kind of reemerged as an option here where he's getting a couple targets every game and is in the end zone mix. So that certainly caps the upside for Cole Kmet. I agree. He's a low-level option. I would play Foster Moreau ahead of him. I would probably take a shot on Cole Kmet over James O'Shaughnessy and Ryan Griffin.
Me too.
Anything else from that game?
Nope. David Montgomery, just kind of a boring RB2. He's getting good volume, but not exciting in this offense.
Yeah, he doesn't even qualify as an interesting running back to talk about with the kind of slate we've got this week. And speaking of which, Minnesota at Detroit gets interesting. The Vikings by 7, over under 46.5. And on the Viking side, it's still pretty easy. Everyone's a good play relative to their respective level. Kirk Cousins, we mentioned a couple times, comfortably inside our top 10 at QB. And with Dalvin Cook out, Alexander Mattison becomes one of the top plays at running back for the week.
Yeah, Jonathan Taylor is the only running back I'd rather have than Alexander Mattison this week. I think he's that strong of a play. He had 34 and 32 opportunities in the 2 games without Dalvin Cook earlier this season. One of those came against the Lions in week 5. Madison had 113 rushing yards in that game, 7 catches, 40 yards, and a touchdown. So I think he's an elite RB1 play. I think Tyler Conklin is kind of the guy you might be wondering about this week. Detroit is 17th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends, 21st in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings. I don't think you're going to get big volume out of Conklin. I just don't think it's going to be a high passing volume game from Minnesota, but I do think he's a good touchdown bet or a decent touchdown bet with the Vikings likely to move the ball pretty well in this game. So he's outside our top 12, but I would take a shot on Conklin over Cole Kmet this week.
Yeah, I would do that as well, just because of the better offensive situation. But I don't expect a whole lot target-wise. And just in general, he's the kind of guy that if it's a terrific matchup for tight ends, maybe you boost him some, but otherwise he's just, in that tight end 15-16 range.
Yeah, his two higher target games came against Baltimore and the Chargers, who, are weak tight end defenses. The Lions aren't great against tight ends, but they're also horrible against wide receivers. So there's really not going to be a need for Minnesota to feature Conklin more than usual in this game.
Right. If you're the Vikings, you're not like, well, we're going to get Ty Conklin going this game because the Lions are going to lock down Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen.
Exactly.
On the Detroit side, DeAndre Swift is the big story. Shoulder injury could cost him multiple games. Seems like it's definitely going to cost him this game. And that should make Jamal Williams a workhorse. 20 touches on Thanksgiving, 15 carries, 5 catches. Swift left that game early. The Lions for the season, and this is probably what makes Williams the most interesting, they have 6 more running back receptions than any other team in the league.
Yeah, Lions running backs have combined to average 9.3 targets per game this season. Now, I think a lot of that is, or at least some of that's because Swift is such a good pass catching back. Williams is solid. He's reliable. I don't think he's not as dynamic. So I think he's not going to see as much target volume as DeAndre Swift, but I do think he's going to dominate carries. After Swift left that Thanksgiving game midway through the second quarter, Williams played 74% of the Lions' offensive snaps. He had 8 of the 9 running back carries and 5 of the 6 running back targets. So you're going to see, Jamar Jefferson and Godwin Igwebuike mix in for, a few touches here and there. But I think Williams is going to get the vast majority of the backfield work.
Yes, I would expect so as well. And he faces a Vikings defense that has really dealt with a lot this year. Of course, the defensive end group has been decimated by the Danielle Hunter injury, Everson Griffin's issues. Defensive tackle, they got Dalvin Tomlinson back today from the COVID list, so he's available to toughen up the run defense. Michael Pierce is a maybe, another defensive tackle for them. He's on IR. He's designated to return, so we'll have to see if he's activated. That would make the run defense tougher than it has been in recent weeks. Anthony Barr also iffy with some injuries, and then even Eric Kendricks and D-tackle Sheldon Richardson were limited Wednesday. So, we'll see about all those guys. The run defense overall started the season well, but it's been up and down since then, and nothing scary in its recent games. Some bad performances mixed in, so it could be a pretty good spot rushing-wise, assuming Minnesota doesn't jump out to a lead, which is entirely possible in this one.
It is possible. That's where, again, it's nice that Williams can do some stuff in the passing game. But yeah, Minnesota 29th in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA. So yeah, I do think it's a good matchup for Williams. But I think above all, you're playing him for the volume.
Yeah, and the Lions' rushing offensive DVOA has also picked up over the last 3 games since getting Taylor Decker back from IR. The pass offense, meanwhile, I hope you don't need anybody besides TJ Hawkinson or Jamaal Williams.
Yes. I do think Josh Reynolds is kind of the best bet among Lions wide receivers now, but yeah, he'd be a total desperation play.
Yeah, 88% playing time, 5 targets, touchdown on Thanksgiving after 90% in his debut. So he's in the mix, but let's hope you don't need to look at that level. New York Giants at the Miami Dolphins. Dolphins by 5, over under 40.5. That's the lowest of the week by 2.5 points. So not an exciting fantasy spot. And the Giants are coming off a game that had 20 total points with the Eagles. So yeah, not a place to look for lots of points. The Giants' second lowest implied total of the week. They opened at 20.5 in that category, down to 17.8 now with Mike Glennon expected to start. We don't know for sure if that's going to happen, though. Daniel Jones limited at Wednesday's practice. It was a walkthrough, so pretty easy to be limited. Joe Judge, of course, in true Joe Judge fashion, refused to admit that Daniel Jones won't play this week.
It does sound like it's a medical decision. It sounds like Jones wants to play. The coaching staff wants him to play, but it's going to be up to the docs to clear him. I don't think you're messing with either those guys outside of 2 quarterback leagues, Jones or Glennon. Miami's defense has played a lot better lately, so I think at best this is kind of a neutral matchup for all these guys.
It's still no practice for Sterling Shepard or Kadarius Toney, even though it was a walkthrough on Wednesday. So even if either of those guys makes it back, they're probably not going in most fantasy lineups.
Yeah, correct. And I think you cannot use Kenny Galladay at this point either. The Giants tried to get him going last week. It still didn't happen. Galladay has just 1 top 40 fantasy week all season.
Even though we got the report before the game last week that they were absolutely determined to get Kenny Galladay his first touchdown of the season, you're still not in love with him?
They tried. He's had at least one end zone shot I saw, but it's just not going to happen if he can't get open. It's kind of hard to make plays.
It does make it difficult to catch passes. 3 catches on 7 targets last week, 50 yards. I will say Mike Glennon is a deepish ADOT guy for a backup QB if he does end up being in there. 9.6 ADOT in his cleanup duty at Dallas this week, kind of in line with what he's done overall in his career. And that number is deeper than any of the past 6 games we got from Daniel Jones. So maybe Mike Glennon is what Kenny Golladay is waiting for. Maybe that's the move, that's absolute determination to get Kenny Golladay the TD.
Well, the high ADOT thing would not be good for Evan Ingram because, we kind of thought it was Jason Garrett that was making him this, short range guy. Evan Ingram's ADOT last week with, Garrett finding out of the way was 0.8 yards. So, his usage did not change. He was out there for 94% of the pass plays. That's good. He saw a 20% target share, had 6 targets, but, 3 catches, 37 yards. I kind of think he just is what he is at this point.
Yeah, Evan Ingram's ADOT is about the same distance as my 9-year-old son is for me whenever he's home from school.
Nice.
On the Dolphins side, still no practice for Will Fuller with the finger of doom. Devontae Parker, though, back to practice this week, so he might be ready to return from IR. And is that going to cut into Jalen Waddle's newfound fantasy studness?
Probably a little, but Waddle can afford to lose some. He's 6th among wide receivers in targets over the past 4 weeks now, and he's 4th among wide receivers in PPR points over the past 4 weeks. So he's been awesome. If Parker is back this week, it probably steals a few targets from Jalen Waddle, but I still think you're starting him. Mike Gesicki might be the more questionable guy because he's been kind of disappointing lately to begin with. 9th in expected fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks. And if he's going to lose some to Devontae Parker, it kind of makes him a fringy tight end 1 at this point, I think.
Yeah, last time we saw Devontae Parker on the field, he and Jalen Waddle each got 11 targets week 8 at Buffalo. We only had 4 for Mike Gesicki in that game. That was a game that Tua missed, so we can't judge a whole lot from it. But I agree, I would be more concerned about Gesicki than about Jalen Waddle here. And the Giants have actually been a negative scoring matchup for both tight ends and wide receivers. So no matter what you count Gesicki as, it's not a great spot for his upside.
Yeah, the Giants have struggled against running backs, 28th in adjusted points allowed, and Myles Gaskin has turned into a workhorse here. He has his opportunities in the last 4 games: 26. 16, 27th, and 27 and 18. He finishes a top 11 fantasy running back in 3 of those 4 games. Phillip Lindsay's dealing with an ankle injury this week too. So, he kind of most of Lindsay's work last week, by the way, came in garbage time. Gaskin was the clear leader of that backfield when the game was still in doubt. So I think Gaskin is a comfortable RB2 play this week.
Yeah, all it took was a romantic trip to London for Miami and Myles Gaskin to rekindle their feelings. 6 straight games since that one, including that one as the beginning point, with 15-plus touches for Gaskin. And as you said, Giants are a strongly positive scoring matchup for running back. So a good spot for him. It's weird to get to week 13 and feel better about having Myles Gaskin as an option than Ezekiel Elliott.
It's fantasy football, man.
Tampa Bay at Atlanta, the Bucks by 11, over under 50, the second highest of the week, and that's mostly on the Bucks side. They had the highest implied team total of the week. Still no Antonio Brown. He's now expected to miss at least 2 more games. Kind of surprising that he has never landed on IR with that ankle injury, but it doesn't really change anything because we've been doing that for weeks.
Yeah, not much to say here on the Bucks side. Start all your guys. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin obviously disappointed last week. Brady just took what the Colts were giving him, and that was, Rob Gronkowski down the middle and then, dump offs to Leonard Fournette. Evans and Godwin both had nice games against the Falcons back in week 2, so they should be solid. And then, Gronk, easy starter, and Lenny Fournette's a RB1 every week now.
I'm definitely going to pour some rum for Joe Boo to get another Leonard Fournette game this week, too. That was beautiful last week. I could go for another one of those.
That was beautiful.
On the Atlanta side, it's easy, right? This matchup, the Bucs are so tough against the run that we just ignore Falcons running backs and we increase volume across the passing game. And that's just how we play it, right, Jared?
Teams throw more against Tampa. Tampa hasn't been a pushover against the pass, though. They're actually up to 8th in Football Outsiders pass defense, DVOA. They're like a neutral matchup for quarterbacks. They're 16th in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. I'm not excited about Matt Ryan here. I do think you're going to get way more passing volume than we've seen out of Ryan. He's actually averaged only 27 pass attempts per game over the last 5 now. He threw it 46 times versus the Bucs in week 2. So, that to me, that's more be excited about Kyle Pitts maybe getting 8 to 10 targets in this game, and I do think Russell Gage is in play as a wide receiver 3 or 4 in PPR leagues, just as a volume play with the Falcons passing volume likely to be elevated this week.
We have a question from Cade Smith on YouTube asking about Russell Gage or Marvin Jones this week. Which way are you going?
Gage pretty easily for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. Between them, I guess it's choosing between Matt Ryan and Trevor Lawrence, and could go either way, but I would lean Russell Gage as well. I think it's more exciting for the Bucs defense if we're getting a whole lot of Matt Ryan pass attempts this week. But I was kind of setting you up because I know you tweeted earlier this week about the matchups bouncing out a little bit, where the Bucs aren't quite as stingy against running backs right now as they were early in the season when they were just a brick wall, and they've gotten stingier against quarterback scoring. Certainly nothing exciting among Atlanta's passing game. Cordero Patterson, though, has gotten to the point where you're not even wondering whether to start him. You have to start him. Right.
Yeah. No, I don't expect Patterson to have a big game on the ground, but his involvement in the passing game is big in this matchup. We saw that in week 2. Patterson had 7 carries for 11 yards. He did score a rushing touchdown, but he had 5 catches on 7 targets for 58 yards and another touchdown. So I'd expect similar usage this week. I think he should be busy in the passing game.
Yeah, things might run through him even more than usual because the Bucs, you want to get around the Bucs defensive line, and they're dealing with the injury to Devin White, so that dings the linebackers a little bit. So Cordero Patterson's going to be important for anything that Atlanta hopes to do in this game.
For sure.
All right. Anything from that game? Anything else from that game?
Nope.
LA Chargers at Cincinnati, Bengals by 3, over under a 50.5. It's the highest of the week. The Chargers are coming off a rough offensive outing, but Justin Herbert's still topped 300 yards for the second straight game and the third time in the past 4 games. His ADOT has come down over the past 4 games, and it looks like a big part of that has been shortening the targets for Mike Williams. Maybe that's an attempt to get him going. It hasn't really happened. He had one good game mixed in among some other forgettable ones. So I guess we should expect that to continue, trying to throw him those shorter passes, and maybe that raises his floor some. There's still nothing really here to get excited about and to boost Mike Williams versus where we usually have him, though.
Yeah, he's just back to what he's always been, like a boomer bust wide receiver 3. You mentioned he had that one big game against the Steelers, but he's been outside the top 40 wide receivers in half PPR points in 4 of his other 5 most recent games. He's 42nd among wide receivers in expected fantasy points over the last 4 weeks. So, it's not even like the usage has been strong. He's just not delivering. The usage has kind of gone back to, wide receiver 4 level. So that just kind of what Mike Williams is. And then Keenan Allen has kind of reemerged as the clear, top option in this passing game.
The Bengals defense is kind of an interesting matchup. Right before their bye in week 10, they put up their 2 worst performances of the year by DVOA. Then coming out of the week 10 bye, and those came against the Browns and the Jets. So it's not like they got beat up by good offenses. Since then, though, they have put up 2 of their best, not the 2 best, but 2 of their best DVOA performances of the year against the Raiders and against the Steelers. So I think in the end, I wouldn't weigh this matchup being overly positive or negative for the Chargers offense. I would just kind of set the Chargers players where they normally are and not, boost them up or knock them down too much.
Yeah, the Bengals defense has been tough to figure out on a weekly basis. The Chargers offense has been kind of inconsistent from week to week. So it does seem like there's kind of a wide range of outcomes for how this game could go on the Chargers side of the ball. But, I do think, Herbert, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler are locked in, and then Williams and Jared Cook are fringe fantasy options.
And then I think the one remaining question about how this game goes is the slow pace for the Bengals, because they're one of the slowest offenses in the league, and they have leaned a little bit back toward the run in recent games after going more pass happy before that. There's a chance that this game disappoints versus the over-under, I think.
There is, yeah, because I do expect Cincy to go super run heavy in this game because they've shown a willingness to do that when, I guess the matchup dictates it. And, the Chargers matchup does dictate running the ball. We've talked about that. Teams are running against the Chargers at the 4th highest rate in neutral situations. So I do think this sets up as a big Joe Mixon game. And I think, you downgrade the passing game a little bit. I think Joe Burrow's a borderline quarterback 1, still starting Ja'Marr Chase. Ja'Marr Chase, by the way, we talked early in the season about how hot he had been running with efficiency, making all these long catches, long touchdowns, which is kind of tough to sustain. That's flipped totally in the opposite direction lately. He's sitting on a 48% catch rate and 10.1 yards per catch over his last 4 games now. His targets and target share are actually up over his last 4 games by a little bit, versus the first 7. So it's going to balance out. He's going to, flip back in the positive direction now at some points. I would stick with Ja'Marr Chase in fantasy lineups, and, T. Higgins is a pretty easy starter as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in most cases you're sticking with him. I wonder, even though at wide receiver 16, if we're overrating him from that start, just for this game situation that we're expecting too.
Yeah, it's a tough matchup, but Chase is 9th among wide receivers in expected fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks. So, again, he's still getting awesome usage. He just hasn't been converting it lately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would generally stick with him. It'd be tough to – I would consider myself lucky if I have 3 better wide receivers than Ja'Marr Chase.
Yes, for sure.
Anything else from that game?
Nope.
Indianapolis at Houston, Colts by 9, over under 45.5. Expect a Jonathan Taylor fest here. Carson Wentz attempted 20 passes in their week 6 meeting, which is a 31-3 Colts win. Tyrod Taylor wasn't around for that one. He's back for this one. I don't think he was the difference there. So Carson Wentz is outside the top 12. I would not expect big volume, barring some kind of shocking Houston performance. The Colts, though, are playing pretty well right now. They won 3 straight games before last week against the Bucs, and they played Tampa tough in that game.
Yeah, it should be a massive JT game. If you're using Wentz, you're just hoping, he kind of gets the touchdown luck, that the touchdowns go his way. He finished quarterback 16 in that first game against Houston because he threw 2 touchdowns. So I do think he's a decent floor play, but you're not going to get big passing volume out of him here. That's obviously not good for Michael Pittman either, even though the matchup is solid. He had just 3 targets in that first game against Houston. So he's kind of a risky wide receiver 2 this week. Although again, I do think, the passing game is going to be efficient when they go to it. I just don't think you're going to get many passing attempts out of Wentz here.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes Jack Doyle somebody to largely forget about, but kind of in that range where Ryan Griffin and James O'Shaughnessy and some other guys we talked about are. 681-1 receiving last week for Doyle, 5 targets in 2 straight games before that. So, down at the bottom of tight end 2 territory, he's probably got about as good a chance of catching a touchdown as any of those other, also rans in that area.
Yeah, 17% target share for Doyle over the last 3 games. Now his route rates still are not very strong. He's still basically splitting pass routes with Mo Alley-Cox. So that's kind of scary. The matchup's good here though. Houston's been really bad against tight ends. So I do think Doyle's in the James O'Shaughnessy, Ryan Griffin tier. I would definitely start the Foster Moreaus and those types over Jack Doyle.
Yeah, and of course, once you get down to that range, whoever scores a touchdown is going to leap 10 spots above where he's ranked heading into the week. Doesn't necessarily mean he was the better play. Before we get away from the Colts offense, Rodrigo Blankenship is eligible to come off IR, but it sounds like the Colts are sticking with Michael Badgley over him and letting Blankenship get back to full strength. So don't go pick up Blankenship and expect him to play this week.
There you go.
On the Houston side, David Johnson, no practice Wednesday, illness and thigh injury there. Rex Burkhead led him in carries each of the past 2 games. He outperformed DJ as a receiver against the Jets, and even Rex Burkhead still stunk in that best of possible matchups for running backs. So let's go ahead and ignore the Houston backfield.
Yeah, Houston won 2 weeks ago, and it was a close loss last week. So they've been able to run the ball. I don't think that's going to be the case in this game, and the Colts have been really good against the run all season. So definitely try to avoid this backfield.
Good IDP news from the Texans, at least. They did just designate Christian Kirksey to return from IR. So we'll be able to use him again in lineups. Most likely. We'll watch to make sure he's activated. So back to the offensive side. It's Brandon Cooks, and it's nothing, right?
Yep, exactly.
I think, this is a spot where Tyrod Taylor by the end of the weekend could be like QB 15. I could see him outscoring guys as high as Matt Ryan and Russell Wilson, but I certainly wouldn't want to trust him. I think it gets to be a little bit better spot if DeForest Buckner can't play, but I'd have to be pretty hard up to take a shot on Tyrod Taylor's upside.
He's a solid quarterback too. Like I wouldn't want to mess with him in 1 quarterback leagues, but 2 quarterback leagues, super flex leagues. Tyrod has finished his weekly finishes in his 4 healthy games this season have been quarterback 11, quarterback 26, quarterback 12, and quarterback 13. So he's delivered in 3 of his 4 games. And the Colts are a pass funnel defense. They're much tougher against the run. Houston's going to be playing from behind in this game. So, he's decent. I wouldn't, I think you can do better in a 1 quarterback league. I would definitely play Taysom Hill over Tyrod Taylor.
Mm-hmm. Jacksonville at the LA Rams. Rams by 12.5, over under 48 in this game. The Jags carry the lowest implied total of the week. James Robinson limited at practice Wednesday. It's weird though. I kept seeing reports that he was limited, but the team website didn't list him on the injury report. So do you know anything about his situation?
I don't. I know he's been dealing with the ankle and the heel thing for a few weeks now, and his usage has not been as strong since coming back from that injury. His snaps have been in the 50s to 60s. He's averaging just 13.7 carries per game, 22nd in expected fantasy points per game over the last 3. So it does seem like the injuries, he's on there with ankle and heel, have been limiting his volume lately.
Yeah, so not an exciting option, but we're going to assume for now that he plays. We'll watch and see what happens this week. Laviska Shenault got more involved last game with no Jamal Agnew. 9 targets in the first game since Jamal Agnew's hip injury. 8 targets, of course, for Laquan Treadwell in that game and 7 for Marvin Jones. So they're spreading the ugliness around to everybody.
Yeah, Shenault did just enough where I'm kind of sort of still interested in him, at least for DFS. I would try not to use him in season long, but he ran a route on 80% of the pass plays. That's a solid number. He was in the slot for 77% of the snaps, which is what we want to see. Led the team with 9 targets. It was a 21.5% target share. Still resulted in just 5 catches for 33 yards. So tough to get excited about him. But now we have Dan Arnold out too, who had kind of been the team's target leader for much of his time with the team. So that should free up some more work for Shenault and these other wideouts.
Yeah, that helps. And I don't think that James O'Shaughnessy is going to step in and take what Dan Arnold had. Otherwise, they might not have traded for Dan Arnold in the first place.
Yeah. O'Shaughnessy's not as strong a pass catcher as Dan Arnold. But I don't know. He might end up playing the same role as far as playing time goes. O'Shaughnessy ended up running a route on 37 of 45 dropbacks last week. He saw 5 targets. It was a 12% target share. So I think he's going to be poor man's Dan Arnold. He might get 4, 5, 6 targets per game. So yeah, if that's what you need, if that's the best you can do, then he's an option for you.
He's Dan Arnold's little brother. He's trailing the group because Arnold's got much better speed. On the Rams side of this matchup, it's the second highest implied total of the week. You're just playing anybody that makes sense. The question here is watching the injuries as they progress through the week. And the big one is Daryl Henderson. No practice Wednesday, got the thigh issue. So we're going to have to watch and see if he's ready to play. Of course, Sony Michel, I think, becomes a strong play if Henderson's out.
Yeah, Sony Michel should be rostered in every single fantasy league right now. So, go check if he's available in yours because he's an elite handcuff. He's an RB1 if Henderson misses any time. But Sean McVay has not seemed worried about Daryl Henderson or Odell Beckham, who's dealing with a hip pointer. So those guys, I'm expecting both to play. And they're both, Henderson's an RB1 in this matchup if his injury isn't a concern. And then Odell Beckham, he was a full-time player last week coming out of the bye. Ran her out on 98% of the pass plays and tied for the team lead with 10 targets. So, he's locked in as an every week fantasy starter the rest of the way now.
Yeah, and it still didn't keep Van Jefferson from being a solid fantasy option. So he's in play kind of in the bottom of wide receiver 3 to mid wide receiver 4 range.
Yeah, I don't know if I tweeted this, but Odell Beckham, Van Jefferson, and Cooper Kupp were all among the top 8 wide receivers in expected fantasy points last week. It's such a condensed offense. It's just those guys. It's not even Tyler Higbee anymore. I'm done with Tyler Higbee. He's on the field, but it's just not happening.
Yeah, I agree. It's not Tyler Higbee season. It certainly helped those guys last week that they were trailing at Green Bay. There should be less pass volume this week, but all can be in play to a greater degree, I think, than the trio from Buffalo that we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Yes.
Washington at Las Vegas, the Raiders by 2.5, over under 49.5. On the Washington side, J.D. McKissick is in the concussion protocol, did not practice Wednesday. I would plan on not having him this week. We'll see how he progresses. Shouldn't be a big factor. Ricky Seals-Jones limited Wednesday. That shouldn't really matter, though, because Logan Thomas played a whole bunch in his return.
He did, yeah. Maybe he was slightly limited, but he played 79% of the snaps, ran her out on 68% of the pass plays. That's a bit lower than he had been playing. So I'd expect his playing time to grow from here. And he saw 6 targets last week. So I think usage-wise, Thomas is, back in the borderline top 12 area, and good matchup here too. Vegas 27th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends and 29th in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings.
Mm-hmm. Antonio Gibson still dealing with his shin thing, so he's still showing up on the injury report, but it's clearly less of an issue than it was previously because his past 3 games have produced 24, 19, and 29 carries, and the latest one also had 7 catches against Seattle.
Yeah, and he looks better to me. So I don't know. Maybe the bye week was enough to just get him at least over that shin issue enough where he can kind of be in the role that people that took him in the first round hoped for. So if you have survived Gibson to this point of the season and are still alive, like he might deliver the top 5 numbers you were hoping for the rest of the way, especially with JD McKissick out. Like if McKissick does not play in this game and doesn't look like he's gonna, you could get Gibson as something close to an every down player.
And especially in this spot against a defense that's friendly to running backs. And it's a neutral scoring matchup for Taylor Heineke. Washington looks like it does not want Taylor Heineke to do more than he needs to. And that is fine with me because that's the way I think of him in a fantasy lineup too.
Yeah, definitely. I think, outside of Logan Thomas, it's still just Terry McLaurin, the only option you want to be messing with in this passing game.
Mm-hmm. On the Raiders side, Darren Waller is the big story. No practice Wednesday. He's got an IT band issue. I mean, we'll see what that means. He's week to week. We don't know yet if he's going to play this week, so we're all watching. And I know I picked up Foster Moreau in an FFPC league last night.
Yeah, I mean, when Waller missed week 7, Moreau basically just stepped into Darren Waller's role. He ran her out on 86% of the pass plays. He saw 6 targets. That was an 18% target share, 6 catches, 61 yards, and a touchdown in that game. He was 13th among tight ends in expected fantasy points. Kind of a neutral matchup here against Washington. They're middle of the pack in both adjusted points allowed to tight ends and Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings. I think usage-wise, Moreau is definitely someone you can count on as a week 13 spot starter.
Yeah, caught just 1 of 5 targets last week against Dallas, but I would look more toward that game against Philly for what's possible this week and what we can chase in putting him in lineup. Certainly not a must play. I've seen people go a little bit overboard. Somebody on Twitter earlier, Adam Koffler, I believe it was, said wherever you have Darren Waller most weeks, that's where Foster Moreau goes in your rankings. I disagree with that, but I do think that Foster Moreau becomes an intriguing option with Darren Waller level upside.
Yes, agree with that.
Washington remains the top scoring matchup actually for fantasy quarterbacks. So it's a great spot for that. Strong positive for wide receivers, neutral for tight ends. I do think that Moreau gets a boost here because the Raiders don't have a whole lot going for them at wide receiver.
Yeah, it does seem like Washington's D has been playing a bit better over the last 3 weeks. Now they had the strong game against Tampa Bay, but just looking at the Football Outsiders DVOA stuff, Washington hasn't been that great the last 2 weeks. So, maybe it's not the best matchup for, quarterbacks as the numbers say right now, but I do still think it's a positive spot for Derek Carr. And Carr is coming off his best game since losing Henry Ruggs. So that makes me feel better about using him this week.
Yeah, his performance has dipped since the Henry Ruggs thing. Even last week's PFF passing grade was actually lower than any of his first 7 games this season with Ruggs in the lineup. So, you can argue about how much to take that into account. It was certainly, it looked better watching the game than the previous 2 weeks. So I think Derek Carr is a solid option this week in a good spot. Washington has played better, but still not a scary defense. Hunter Renfrow, meanwhile, much to Jared Smola's chagrin, a strong play at this point, 8+ targets, 7+ catches in 4 of his past 5 games.
Yeah, Renfrow has been a top 14 fantasy wide receiver in 3 of 4 games without Henry Ruggs. He's 20th in expected fantasy points per game over that span, and gets a positive matchup here. So yeah, he's basically a must start in PPR, and even in non PPR, I think he's like a pretty solid wide receiver 3.
That's big because I don't know if folks listening realize Jared hates all average size white guys in the NFL just because it makes him wonder why he's not doing more with his physical abilities.
Yeah. That's true. But I love the numbers more than I hate, the average size white wide receiver. So gotta follow the numbers.
There you go. Deshaun Jackson put up the numbers last time out. Limited Wednesday with a calf, so we'll see about the health. But he cracked 100 yards against the Cowboys on Thanksgiving. Just 4 targets though, 48% playing time, and 10.3% target share in that game. Tied for 5th on the team in targets.
He was pretty close though. Deshaun Jackson was to Bryan Edwards and Zay Jones in routes. He's definitely climbing in routes, and those other 2 guys are kind of falling in the opposite direction. So I'll be curious to see if that continues this week. I mean, you still can't use Deshaun Jackson this week. If we see him take over as the number 2 guy though, behind Hunter Renfrow, then he might become an option.
Mm-hmm. And Josh Jacobs is a pretty easy start at this point.
He is, yeah. The volume's been there, especially in the passing game. He's averaging 5 targets per game over the past 4 weeks now, so that makes him easier to trust, even if the Raiders get into negative game script.
Quick flex question before we move on to the next game. LeBron's brain says via YouTube, only options at flex this week are Mark Ingram, TJ Hawkinson, Cole Beasley, Jerry Jeudy. I'll scroll up and see if I can see what the scoring is. But let's assume PPR here. Who would you play, Jared?
It's Ingram for me, regardless of the scoring system. I think he's a pretty solid flex, and the other 3 don't really excite me.
Full PPR would make Hawkinson a tough choice. It would a tough choice between Hawkinson and Mark Ingram.
PPR. He just said it was PPR. So
yeah. So it's really a toss up between Ingram and Hawkinson for me. I really don't know what to expect target wise with Taysom Hill in there, and I have no idea if they're going to have any rushing success without the 2 OTs. So I wouldn't argue against playing Mark Ingram. I honestly not sure who I would land on between Ingram and Hawkinson in my own lineup.
Mark Ingram.
There you go. So I guess the consensus here is Mark Ingram based on those 2 evaluations. Back to this rundown. San Francisco at Seattle, 49ers by 3.5 in this one, over under 45.5. Deebo Samuel expected to miss at least 1 game, perhaps a second with his groin injury. That should be good for the target volumes of Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle. And really, I don't care who else is playing any pass catching roles for the 49ers unless I'm combing for 3K wideouts and DraftKings.
Yeah, Kittle, an elite play, should get the target boost without Deebo, and the Seahawks have been bad against tight ends. And then Brandon Ayuk, I think he's like a wide receiver 2 this week. I mean, his production has been pretty solid for the past month anyways, and he should also get a target boost. Although it's interesting, Deebo hasn't been seeing many targets the past couple of weeks. He's been playing more running back than wide receiver even. But yeah, I do still think Ayuk and Kittle probably pick up an extra target or 2.
Maybe Elijah Mitchell gets the volume boost with Deebo Samuel out this week.
Not that he needs a volume boost, right?
Right. Well, the Seahawks also don't look capable of pushing the Niners out of their run-leaning game script. So I'm not sure it's going to be too high volume a situation for anybody, but certainly good spots for those pass catchers. Elijah Mitchell, RB1 right now after I played him last week. I benched him last week behind Miles Sanders. So fortunately won that matchup anyway.
Yeah, back-to-back 27 carry games for Elijah Mitchell. That's like Derrick Henry stuff, and like no one else. And he also has 5 and 6 targets among his past 3 games. He has 0 targets in the game in between those. But nice to see that the Niners are willing to get him involved in the passing game. We'll have to see if JaMychal Hasty is back this week. He did return to a limited practice on Wednesday. If he's back, he might step back into the pass catching role. But like you said, I mean, I think the Niners should be able to go run heavy in this game, and that's obviously Elijah Mitchell. So yeah, he's an RB1 play across scoring formats this week.
On the other side, DK Metcalf was limited Wednesday with a foot issue. He sat out last week's first practice with the same issue, though, so it seems like an improved situation versus that. He went full last Friday, limited Saturday, then played in the game, as far as we know. Allegedly played in that game. Probably hurt his foot stomping around at the way Russ Wilson is playing, I'm guessing.
Yeah, man, it's a tough spot with this Seattle passing game. Getting to this point of the fantasy season and considering benching DK Metcalf. And I guess you're not considering benching Tyler Lockett because he's still managed to have a couple strong games the past 2 weeks, despite Russell Wilson's struggles. But, Metcalf, coming off an absolute dud, he did have 8 targets in the 2 games before last week with Russell Wilson. So I'd lean towards sticking with him. There's nothing to worry about in the Niners secondary as far as matchup goes for Metcalf, but man, we've seen how low the floor is these past few weeks.
We certainly have. It doesn't help, though, that Pete Carroll basically said this week they need to run the ball more, although he admitted he can understand why Shane Waldron hasn't stuck with the run because things haven't gone well when they run the ball. The answer, though, is clearly Adrian Peterson joining the practice squad this week. I mean, why would you bother with Adrian Peterson at this point? Why not just grab somebody young off of some other team's practice squad and see what happens? Even if the answer is nothing happens and you dump that guy the next week, it's at least something different. Adrian Peterson didn't work in Tennessee where running backs work. So why?
I don't know. And from a fantasy perspective, you can just completely ignore this backfield. It's been a 2-man committee with Alex Collins and DJ Dallas the past couple of weeks, and neither guy has been effective. And Peterson's not going to be effective if he ends up getting in there.
Yeah, I agree with that. You mentioned Tyler Lockett. I agree. Kind of relatively easy start, not to the level that we expect him to be at this point, but He did top 90 yards each of the past 2 weeks, despite only getting 5 targets in each of those games. We can't expect him to keep doing that kind of yardage on that kind of target counts, but he is running deeper routes. He is playing more outside as opposed to the slot than in recent seasons. So there is more of that kind of upside to his game.
Yeah, so in the past 3 weeks with Russell Wilson back, Lockett is 25th among wide receivers in expected fantasy points per game, and DK Metcalf is 28th in expected fantasy points per game. So they're getting similar usage, and they're getting, wide receiver 3 level usage. So I think that's kind of what we should consider these guys at this point.
Yeah, and no thanks on any Seahawks running back if I can help it. Gerald Everett, though, looks well within the mix this week.
Yeah, he 21 targets over the past 3 weeks for Everett. That's second most among all tight ends. He's 9th among tight ends in expected fantasy points over that span. The matchup is tough. The Niners have been tough against tight ends this season. They're 7th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. They're dealing with some linebacker injuries, though, aren't they? Does that impact the matchup for Everett at all?
Yes, no Fred Warner this week with a hamstring injury. I think that should make it a better matchup. We'll see exactly what happens with that. But Washington had also been playing better in that area of the field heading into the Monday night game, and Gerald Everett did fine in that one. Yep. So I think given what Russell Wilson is capable of right now, Gerald Everett should be in the mix here with a matchup that's neutral.
Yep.
Anything else from that game?
No.
Baltimore at Pittsburgh, Ravens by 4.5, over under 44. TJ Watt is likely out for the Pittsburgh defense in this one. He's on the COVID list. Last time the Steelers played without him was week 11 against the Chargers. They allowed 41 points, 533 yards in that game. They, of course, allowed another 41 points with Watt back on the field last week. One of those touchdowns by the Bengals came via pick 6. It's not the Pittsburgh defense that you're used to seeing, and that's a good thing for Lamar Jackson because he needs to rebound.
He does, and I'm going to bet on Lamar Jackson rebounding because he's Lamar Jackson. Because as you mentioned, this is a mediocre Steelers defense that's been weakened by injuries at this point. So I'm going to bet on Lamar. I would not go benching him for any of these streamers. Not even a Taysom Hill level streamer.
Yeah, and I agree with that because he can have a bad game and still have a terrific fantasy line. He's had bad games the past 2 outings surrounding the game he missed against Chicago with the illness, 7 interceptions over his past 3, another 2 INTs 2 games before that against the Chargers. That one was at least a better performance overall outside of the interceptions. But, like I said, the current version of the Pittsburgh defense isn't very good. It shouldn't be all that challenging for Lamar Jackson this week. If he's got a rebound in him, it should come in this game, even if it's not the ultimate ceiling game that Lamar Jackson has given us in the past. There's enough there that we should feel decent about using him.
Yeah, definitely.
Ben Roethlisberger, no practice Wednesday. He's dealing with right shoulder and pectoral injuries. I think they should list him as man boobs instead of pectoral when we're talking Roethlisberger. But he was also listed with those injuries in week 12, but he started that week limited. So it's possible that he's a little bit more banged up this week than last.
Yeah, I would expect him to play. I would expect him to continue playing pretty poorly, and I think the Ravens defense is a nice play this week.
Mm-hmm. Chase Claypool also limited Wednesday with a toe issue. He's seen 9 and 8 targets the past 2 weeks, kind of quietly went for 93 and 82 yards in those games.
Yeah, Claypool is 4th among wide receivers in expected fantasy points over the past 2 weeks. The toe thing, he's been dealing with that for a few weeks now, so I'm not super worried about that. So, despite Ben's poor play, I do think Claypool is a pretty solid fantasy starter this week, and Deontay Johnson is obviously locked in.
Pat Freiermuth, it looked early in the week. He landed in the concussion protocol Tuesday, so that timing made me worried about his availability this week. But he was a full practice participant Wednesday, so it sounds like it seems like about as mild as it could be, and that he should be on track to get back.
Yeah, strange situation. They never announced the concussion during Sunday's game, but full go Wednesday. So I would expect Freiermuth to play at this point. He's been awesome, especially in games Eric Ebron has missed, and Ebron's going to miss this game. Freiermuth has finished tight end 13, tight end 2, tight end 2, and tight end 7 in his last 4 games without Eric Ebron. And the Ravens are weaker against tight ends than they are wide receivers, so it could be a spot where there's a bit more volume pushed Freiermuth's way.
It pays to be a large, reliable receiver near Ben Roethlisberger at this point.
For sure.
Anything else in that game?
Nope.
Denver at Kansas City, the Chiefs by 9.5 here, over under 47. Melvin Gordon did not practice Wednesdays, dealing with shoulder and hip injuries. Got hurt early in last week's game, but returned the ensuing drive. So we'll watch the rest of the week. The guess at this point would be that he plays in this game.
Yeah, I would expect him to play too. And there really wasn't any change as far as usage goes in this backfield coming out of the bye week. Javonte Williams did lead in snaps and lead in pass routes. I do think some of that was obviously due to the fact that Gordon ended up missing like a series or two with the hip injury. So I still think you're looking at, pretty close to a 50-50 split here. I do think both guys are in play though, as, lower end RB2s because of the matchup. Casey's still weak against the run, and in their two meetings last year, the Broncos running backs combined for 29 carries in both of those games. So they wanted to go run heavy. They were able to go run heavy. So, if you can get about that number from these two guys, you're talking, 13, 14, 15 carries out of both Gordon and Javonte Williams.
Yeah, some of this will depend on how the game starts out. If the Chiefs jump out to a big lead, it might take Denver out of doing that a whole lot. But if Denver starts with the ball, they're probably going to try to pound it a lot. One thing that emerged in last week's game, and I'll be curious to see if it's something they're trying to do or just happened in that game, was Javonte Williams was the favored red zone running back last week against the Chargers. There were two drives where he came in on when they got to the red zone on drives that Melvin Gordon had been on the field. One time was early, the other time was a little bit later. There was another one where Melvin Gordon came in the red zone when Javonte Williams had opened the drive, but that one followed a 42-yard catch and run by Williams. It was his third straight touch on that drive. It was his fifth touch of the drive. So, tough to know if they're just mixing them like that and put Melvin Gordon in because it was time to put Melvin Gordon in, or if they were like, all right, Javonte needs a little rest, we'll put Melvin Gordon in. Possible that Javonte Williams is turning into the favored red zone back. I wouldn't operate that way yet, but we do have Javonte Williams ahead of Melvin Gordon in the rankings this week, probably more than we have any other week because of both, at least some edge there and also the edge the past couple games in the pass offense.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you are deciding between the two, it'd be Javonte Williams for me. But, Gordon still ended up with more carries last week. It was 17 carries for Gordon to 14 for Javonte Williams. So I do think Gordon's still a fine play, but Javonte would be my preference if you're choosing between them.
Yes, I agree with that. Stated in that way. It's a positive matchup for Noah Fant as well, as I mentioned before. Ryan McDowell of Dynasty League Football says only the Eagles have allowed more top 12 PPR performances by tight ends this year than the 9 that Kansas City has allowed.
Yeah, we have the Chiefs 23rd in adjusted points allowed to tight end, so it's a good matchup from that standpoint too. It's just, it's tough to like any part of this passing game because it's low volume and the targets are so spread. We know the wide receivers have been pretty unreliable, but even Noah Fant in the 3 games since that he's played since Jerry Jeudy returned, Noah Fant is 27th among tight ends in expected fantasy points per game over that stretch. So he's just not getting the usage we kind of need to make him a reliable fantasy option.
Yeah, the target volume has stunk across the Denver offense. So if you're playing any Denver pass catchers in this game, you're hoping for like a classic Patrick Mahomes Chiefs game where they jump out to a huge lead and Denver has to throw the ball 40 plus times and get targets for all these guys. At wide receiver, Jerry Jeudy is really the only one that I'm looking at all. Not excited about him, but he looks like the best bet for targets and, production on those targets.
Yeah, so the wide receivers in expected fantasy points since Jeudy came back, Jeudy leads the way. He's 43rd in expected points. So he's getting wide receiver 4 level usage. Tim Patrick is next at 61st, and Cortland Sutton is 102nd in expected fantasy points per game. Or it's so sad. Like a guy that good should not be getting ignored like this in the offense. But you can't use Cortland Sutton, you can't use Tim Patrick, and I think Jeudy is at best a lower end wide receiver 3.
That's what happens when you have no idea how to pick any quarterbacks. On the Chiefs side, to play the big dogs. Clyde Edwards-Helaire returned in week 11 before their bye last week. He even scored. He took over the carry lead again from Daryl Williams, pretty clearly ahead of Daryl Williams. He even scored from the 1-yard line. It was Daryl Williams leading CEH in pass snaps, though.
Yeah, Williams led in passing snaps. He led in snaps in general. It was close. It was 53% for Williams to 47% for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Williams had 3 targets to Clyde Edwards-Helaire's 2. It was CEH's first game back from injury, so maybe he gets a bit more now coming off the bye. I do think Williams is going to remain involved though. So I think Edwards-Helaire is kind of stuck in RB2 territory.
Yes, I agree with that. I think Williams is a low-level flex option if you're looking down in that range. Like if you're wondering whether you should pick up Austin Walter or Godwin Iwabuke, Go ahead and play Daryl Williams this week.
Agreed.
Nicole Hardman has finally seen his playing time drop, and sharply the last time out played 18% of the snaps.
He has been 5th among Chiefs wide receivers and pass routes in 2 straight games now. He's fallen behind Byron Pringle and Demarcus Robinson and Josh Gordon. So Hardman's off the fantasy radar.
And still, there's really nobody worth using beyond Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce.
Correct.
New England at Buffalo to wrap things up this week. Bills by 3, over under 43 on the New England side. Mac Jones is playing well, but this is a negative matchup. He's not a volume winner. I mean, I think in this passing game, if you're looking down in like wide receiver 4 range, there's some upside to Kendrick Bourne and Nelson Aguilar, especially because the Bills are now without Tre'Davious White.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a fun real life game. I think it's not a game you want to invest heavily in fantasy. I think it's going to be a defensive battle. Even Kendrick Bourne, man, he is overachieving his usage by a ton. I mean, he's finished as a top 5 fantasy wide receiver in 2 of the last 3 weeks now. I mean, he's 75th among receivers in expected fantasy points over the last 4 weeks. So, you're kind of playing with fire if you're using Kendrick Bourne again, especially in this matchup. I don't think the Patriots passing game is going to have a ton of success.
You don't think Kendrick Bourne can continue his 108% catch rate?
Doubt it, but we'll see.
The Bills activated star Lotulelei off the COVID list Wednesday. He missed the past 3 games, so that is good for the Buffalo run defense, which certainly matters for this matchup. Not having him didn't hurt against the Saints on Thanksgiving night. Of course, they were very banged up at running back. It didn't hurt against the Jets 2 weeks before. Of course, they're the Jets. It certainly didn't help, though, against Jonathan Taylor in that game in between. So It's a big return for that run defense. And like I said, it matters because the Patriots would like to give the ball to Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm Bill Belichick in this game, I'm going to go run heavy because, the Bills have struggled against these power running teams. Jonathan Taylor had the big game against them. Derrick Henry had the big game against them. And, Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson aren't those guys. But I do think New England's offense is similar in how it plays. So I do think you're going to get a lot of carries for those guys. They're going to be split basically 50-50. We've seen that the past 2 weeks now where Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson, as far as snaps go, as far as carries go, that it's been pretty much split right down the middle. So, that hurts both guys. But I do think, they both should get in the double digits as far as carries go in this game. So they're both in play as RB3s.
Yeah, they're kind of in the same range as Boston Scott and Miles Sanders at this point, in a worse matchup overall, but at least on a team where the quarterback isn't taking away the touchdowns. So they're okay options. I think Brandon Bolden's continued role in the passing game, further lowers the ceiling on him. It makes none of the Patriots running backs exciting at all, but all of them can be used at different levels if you need them.
Yeah, I would prefer both of the Jets guys this week to both of the Patriots guys just because of the matchup.
You mean both Eagles guys, right?
Both Eagles guys to both Patriots guys, yep.
Yeah. Hunter Henry, by the way, before we get away from the Patriots, has now gone 7 straight games without reaching 40 receiving yards. He has 1 game in that span with more than 2 catches.
Yeah, the ultimate touchdown or bust play, and I don't think he's a good touchdown bet in this spot.
The Jerome Bettis of tight ends. On the Bills side, apparently they're quitting Zach Moss again. But Jared, the last time that we saw Zach Moss healthy scratched, he returned the next week to score 2 touchdowns against Miami.
Yeah, I would not be surprised at all if he's active again for this game. Some of the beat writers actually predicted that he was going to be a healthy scratch for that Saints game just based on the matchup. I think, the Bills kind of wanted to attack the edges more in that game. I don't know what they're going to want to do against the Patriots, but I would not be surprised if Moss is active. And that would obviously make Singletary and Breda tougher to trust. I would try to stay away from the Bills backfield this week.
Yes, I would too. They went run heavy against the Saints on Thanksgiving night. We got 15 carries from Devin Singletary. We got 9 from Matt Breida. I still prefer not to play any of them. If there's no Zach Moss again, Devin Singletary ahead of Matt Breida, but neither is going to be exciting.
Yeah, I think I'd go Singletary, though. Just watching the game, it seemed like Breida was the lead back, and then he blew a blitz pickup in the second quarter, and then he didn't play again for until the fourth quarter. So I don't know what Buffalo's plans are in this backfield, which is why I would just try to stay away from it.
I think the only thing that Matt Breida has done consistently in his career so far is fall out of favor.
Yeah. Yep.
And like currently we have Devin Singletary first among Buffalo running backs in our rankings, but he's one spot behind Boston Scott, just to kind of give you some context for where these guys rank.
Yep.
The top 3 Buffalo wideouts, of course, are all in consideration. Not a matchup, though, that boosts any of them. I mean, obviously, Stephon Diggs is an easy start. I'm more interested in Cole Beasley than I am Emmanuel Sanders, but, bottom of wide receiver 3 range for him.
Yeah, I would not want to use Emmanuel Sanders or Cole Beasley in this matchup. Both guys have been pretty disappointing from a production standpoint and from a usage standpoint over the last month now. And again, I don't think it's going to be a big game for the Bills offense. And I think, most of what they do is going to go through Stephon Diggs and, potentially Dawson Knox at this point, who kind of looks like the number 2 option in the passing game.
Yeah, still like him. So the Patriots are number 1 in tight end coverage DVOA, according to Football Outsiders right now. But there's a lot to worry about at wide receiver in this matchup for that Patriots defense. And Dawson Knox is just in a good situation, especially with his red zone role compared to other tight ends that are in the same range of the rankings. So, I mean, he capitalized on a positive matchup 2 weeks ago. Last week, he had a tough matchup against New Orleans, caught 2 touchdowns among his 3 targets. So, I mean, if you're picking among tight ends that make you shrug, I'm going to go with the one that plays with Josh Allen right now.
Yeah, and after being a bit limited in his first game back from that hand injury, Knox has run routes on 95% of the Bills' pass plays and then 84% of the Bills' pass plays. So the usage has been awesome. And despite the negative matchup, I think Knox is a pretty easy top 10 tight end play this week.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's going to do it for this Week 13 preview edition of the podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now. You can see our full Week 13 rankings to help finalize your lineup decisions. Check the tools, the intel, and the teams and boards menus at the top of the website for all the customized assistance that you need this week. If you still have a last burning question or two, come on over to the DraftSharks Discord. It's free to join. You can find a link to do that in the description for this podcast. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.